Everything changed unexpectedly on the day when instead of global warming, there was an ice age. In just a few days, the entire human civilization was frozen in ice. People weren't prepared for this turn of events, and without the necessary skills and equipment, froze and died by the millions. But the cold was not the only problem in this cruel new world. Ordinary and available to everyone yesterday resources became the greatest treasures for which the survivors were willing to risk their lives. 28 weeks after the start of this icy apocalypse, our protagonist was walking through this landscape, looking unperturbed. As he looked around, he noticed that it looked like this place had not yet been explored. Here he hoped to find food and fuel, which had become extremely valuable to the remaining survivors. The cities were buried under the ice, and the ice was thick enough to walk on. At least that's what it seemed to him at first glance. However, the moment he stepped onto the ice and began to slide across it, things did not go according to plan. There was a sharp crack and a great noise, and our hero panicked. Everything happened so quickly and unexpectedly that it was like an earthquake. Many meters of ice under him cracked, and he simply could not think of any other reason. Before he fell, he only had time to think that this frozen world is like God telling them that human civilization is as fragile as thin ice and vulnerable to even a single blow. Immediately after that, our hero fell into the huge crack formed beneath him, cursing his bad luck and imminent death. However, he was not going to give up just like that. Turning to the right, he clung to his pickaxe, praying that it would not break. Unfortunately, it didn't help, and he continued to slide down, unable to stop his fall. Luckily, he landed on a supermarket roof covered in snow, which cushioned his fall. If it had been ice, he would have died there. But just as he was about to remember the adage about escaping death, his joy faded when he encountered a creature with sharp teeth, 4 eyes, and 4 horns named White Skin. Even more desperate in this frozen world is the fact that these creatures prey on humans. While he was fleeing, a blue parasite-like creature hovered above them and watched. This is really disastrous for our boy, but suddenly huge stalactites formed over the monster, which then fell on him, killing him. Looking at this, our protagonist wondered if because the noise was too loud, the ice stalactites staggered. He brushed this thought aside, however, for it had saved his life. Suddenly, crumbling rocks began to fall on him from above. One of them fell right in front of him, which meant a bad situation. He was about to be buried alive. A moment later, he was completely buried, and the parasite we had seen earlier was next to him. It approached his unburied hand and then began to use some sort of power, merging with him. Suddenly his eyes opened, and he was shocked to find that one of his eyes had turned blue. He wondered what had happened, and at the same time scratched the back of his head, not realizing that a parasite had entered his body. Deciding to forget about what had happened, and after being outside long enough, he decided to hurry back home. Fortunately, he noticed a chocolate bar lying on the ground and was glad that at least today he would not return empty-handed. A few minutes later, he approached the entrance to the den where he lived. He noted that since most of the city was frozen by the ice, the only way home was through this passage. Day by day, he didn't know how long this life would last, but compared to what was outside, the situation inside the building was pretty bad too. When the disaster happened, many people were trapped in this building, and now with the meager supplies, he couldn't imagine what those people would do in this apocalyptic world. No one could guarantee that they wouldn't cross that line. That's when he noticed that it looked like these guys hadn't started patrolling yet today. Had to hurry home before they arrived. Walking up to his door, he knocked on it and a girl named Xiaoming opened it for him. He was shocked that Xiaoming opened the door so quickly and wondered if she had locked it. But when he came over, she hugged him and said that she just wanted to see him soon. Then she asked if he wanted to see her soon too, and he, blushing, replied that of course he did. He reminded her, however, to lock the door securely. She agreed, but wondered if locking the door was more important than his girlfriend, to which he showed her the chocolate bar he'd brought. Curious, she asked what it was, and he replied that it was chocolate. Overjoyed, she hugged him and kissed him, calling him the best. She asked if he had brought only one chocolate bar, to which he explained that he could only find one, and for it he was almost eaten by monsters, urging her to eat it quickly. He was about to leave, but then she noticed his backpack and her expression turned sour. In the other room, he sat by the fire and pondered what to do. It had been a few days since he had found a proper meal. He wondered if they would have to feed on the seeds he had collected earlier. The situation with the seeds they planted wasn't too optimistic. If they ate the seeds, there would be no hope left. If it continued like this, everyone would go crazy. Taking the meat of the monster that had chased him earlier, he examined it and thought that if the meat of these monsters wasn't poisonous, the people in this building wouldn't have to endure hunger. But looking on the bright side, at least the fat of these monsters was good fuel for a fire. At least they didn't freeze to death in this frozen world. Glancing at the date, he realized it was Valentine's Day. He had completely forgotten. He rushed into the living room and called out to his girlfriend, apologizing for forgetting. However, she was nowhere to be found. Wondering where she had gone, he heard a deliberate knock on the door and recognized it as his girlfriend. Perplexed as to why she was outside and what she was doing, he opened the door but was hit in the face with a metal bat. From the blow, he flew aside and, coming to his senses, saw his girlfriend next to the blonde-haired guy embracing him, bleeding and in pain. Our hero confronts her and asks why she betrayed him to follow DeLong. She flies into a rage, asking how he could even ask, and wondering if he thinks he can trick her with a piece of chocolate. She asks if he believes she doesn't know he hid all the food. Continuing, she points to the large bag he was in and asks if he only brought air, accusing him of lying even to his girlfriend. She doubts that he is still human. Then DeLong leans toward our hero, expressing pity for him as a comrade. He offers advice, stating that this apocalyptic world is governed by the law of the jungle, not civilized society. He emphasizes that Mo can't even support his own women, so who would agree to follow him? The weak, he argues, have only two choices: depend on the strong or fall prey to the weak. Smirking, he demands that Mo give him food, to which Mo refuses. Seeing that Mo refuses to depend on the strong, DeLong decides that they will hunt him down instead. When Mo asks what they are going to do, DeLong breaks his leg with a golf club and then mercilessly stabs him in the face and arm. DeLong and his gang continue to stab him until he is unrecognizable. One of the gang members informs DeLong that after searching the entire house, all they found was rotten millet. DeLong suggests using the weaklings for food and instructs his assistant to bring a knife to cut it up. In his fading mind, Mo ponders that this is the kind of end he would least like to see. If there is another life, he would like to survive. Suddenly, he finds himself in a completely different place. Opening his eyes, he jumps up in horror and wonders what is going on. Realizing that he is unharmed despite being dead, he finds himself 24 hours before the global ice age begins. The protests in Queen's Park were still ongoing, and the Metropolitan Police Department deployed large numbers of police officers to maintain order. Meanwhile, Manhattan's elite indulged in their exclusive parties, and Brooklyn gangs made deals on the darkest streets. The entire city remained in ignorance of the impending disaster, except for one man, our protagonist. Suddenly, an aurora appeared in the sky, attracting everyone's attention, and everyone rushed to take pictures. However, Mo knew that this was the harbinger of the Ice Age. At this moment, someone called him, and he recognized the caller as Xiao Ming. Remembering her derogatory remarks about being a weak woman who could only rely on the strong, he became angry. Blinded by his disdain for her false appearance, he decided to end it. Answering the phone, she inquired if he was still working overtime and remarked on the beautiful aurora. She then brazenly asked for money, stating that her credit card was maxed out. Instead of helping her, he decided it was time to end the relationship. He informed her that they had to break up and told her not to contact him again. Shocked, she demanded an explanation of what was going on and whether he was serious, but he remained silent and deleted her contacts from his phone. Given a second chance, he decided that women like her who could bring him harm would freeze to death in the impending ice age. He understood the seriousness of this possibility and vowed to prepare diligently. In his previous life, no, he corrected himself, in his previous cycle, he had failed. Over the next 24 hours until the ice age, the temperature would gradually drop to freezing point. As of this point, there are less than 28 hours until the world freezes over. Initially a seemingly sufficient amount of time, as the temperature drops, people realize the severity of the problem. An already unstable society will descend into more chaos. This leaves only 1 hour to gather supplies. Aside from basic necessities like food and water, in the growing chaos, they also need protection in the form of weapons. Suddenly, he is stopped by 2 police officers, deeming him suspicious for wandering the streets so late. One of the officers gets out of his car and orders Mo to stand still, pointing a gun at him, while the other officer reports a suspicious robber on 4th Avenue. Mo realizes they mistook him for the robber. Given the recent restrictions in the neighborhood, raising his hands, Mo explains that he only has a cell phone in his hand. Frustrated, he inwardly scolds, realizing he has no time for idle chatter with these officers. The beginner officer, instructed by his superior, approaches cautiously, nervous. He demands to look in Mo's bag. Mo complies, shows his belongings, and explains that he is a regular laborer heading home. However, the agitated officer, gripped by anxiety, mistakes the innocent object for a weapon and shoots Mo. In this dire situation, with a second chance at life slipping away, Mo decides he wants to live. Suddenly, his eye, colored blue by the parasite, is activated and a blue aura surrounds him. Puzzled, he asks himself what is happening. He can now clearly see bullets and time slows down. In the midst of the chaos, Mo manages to dodge the first bullet and realizes it's not an illusion when an officer fires several shots in his direction. Showing an almost effortless grace, Mo dodges the bullets with a simple step, not wanting to waste time dealing with ignorant people. Suddenly, something inexplicable happens. The bullets freeze in midair at an astonishing speed. Mo approaches the beginner officer and delivers a powerful blow, robbing him of his senses. The blow is so powerful that the officer's eye flies out and he flies backwards, and the senior officer turns and sees his colleague distorted and probably dead. In a panic, he falls on his ass, demanding answers as to what happened to the beginner. Showing both strength and uncertainty, Mo finds himself surrounded by an icy aura with a menacing stare. He admits that he doesn't know who he is, leaving the officer to confront the inexplicable display of ability before him. Svein begins to talk on the radio, announcing that the suspect has escaped and repeating the message for emphasis. Despite witnessing it himself, he found it hard to believe. Regaining his strength, he promptly left the scene and ran until he reached his apartment and collapsed in his room, panting. He reflected on the recent events, wondering about their reality, for how could he have done such a thing? Taking the officer's pistol he had acquired earlier, he decided to test his abilities. Pointing the gun forward, he fired, his power activated, and he intercepted the bullet with astonishing speed, catching it in midair, which confirmed his suspicions. He realized that he had gained superpowers. He noticed that the ice seal was still missing and wondered why frost had appeared on his body. Could it be due to the high speed of traveling like a supersonic airplane? It seems that this superpower is indeed related to speed, he concluded. Although it wasn't particularly outstanding, he was already anticipating the impending end of the world. This ability could allow him to be one step ahead, to quickly foresee what was coming. As he pondered, his thoughts were interrupted by a knock. Opening the door, he found his landlady standing there. She inquired about the sound of the gunshot, and he nervously attributed it to a malfunctioning TV remote, apologizing. She then warned him about the lack of security in the area, telling him about a previous robbery at a nearby supermarket. Thanking her for her concern, he watched her leave, reminding him that he should take care of his health and not work too much overtime. At this point, he decided to deal with the supply situation, but then he remembered that she had mentioned the nearest supermarket. Knowing that it must have everything he needed, he smirked and declared that it was time to go stock up on groceries. There was only one cashier in the camera-filled grocery store. In no time at all, he had scooped up so many groceries in the aisle that the bored cashier suddenly flinched at the number of checks coming out of the machine. She picked it up, wondering what was going on and wondering if someone had just made a huge purchase. Then she noticed a note apologizing and urging her to leave soon and stay safe. As she read it, she found the message odd. She was fed up with recent events. This store had been robbed a few days ago, and now this strange occurrence had happened. Suddenly, 2 armed men entered the store, pointing their guns at her. She muttered to herself that she had been having very bad luck lately. The blue-haired guy demanded that she hand over the money, confirming that it was a robbery. He shouted so loudly that his words could be heard outside, attracting the attention of the mysterious figure. Suddenly his gun froze and everything around him became cold, and he himself was confused by the sudden chill. The red-haired guy told his companion to look at the door, and when he turned around, the mysterious figure that had appeared earlier was fully revealed. A terrifying, distorted monster. The green-haired guy, figuring it was a costume, asked what kind of monster it was. His friend, however, was not so calm. He shot the monster 3 times, but the monster didn't even flinch. Then the monster reached out and clawed into the green-haired guy's body like a doll, pinning his head to his skin and ripping off the top of his face. A girl hiding nearby, instead of running away, started taking pictures of the monster eating the guy and posted them on TikTok. Some guards, upon seeing the photos, were shocked and wondered if the young people liked it. The guy next to them mentioned that TikTok has become very popular lately. Suddenly, a red message appeared on his phone, and he didn't immediately realize what it was. For a moment, they realized that it seemed to be an emergency message from the government. Then the city alarm rang, and the fat man noticed that it looked like something serious had happened. The signal asked the townspeople to be careful and announced itself as the Department of Homeland Security and Logistics. Upon hearing this, Mo realized that it had already started. For unknown reasons, the city was experiencing a cold snap. The alarm urged the citizens to close their doors and windows, stay warm. A cold wave is coming, and Brooklyn will be the first to feel the cold. Meanwhile, in Building 58 of the new borough, in an ordinary apartment, a message from the Department of Homeland Security and Logistics sounds, urging residents to heed their warning. An obese man ponders the gravity of the situation, realizing the seriousness of the Department of Homeland Security's involvement. However, Blondie waves him off, stating that it is likely nothing serious. The message advises residents not to panic, but to secure their homes from the impending cold weather, urging them to stay indoors and keep warm. Meanwhile, in the same building, DeLong is questioning his men about why their hostage is still not divulging any information. The hostage insists that he really doesn't know anything. DeLong pulls a phone out of his vest and shows a picture of a guy drugging the boss's daughter. The hostage nervously admits that at the time, he didn't realize how important this woman was. DeLong brushes off his excuses, noting that people like him can only hope for divine favor. Taking the boy's hand, DeLong begins wielding the knife, methodically cutting off his fingers. Counting the severed fingers, he reaches 6, exactly the number he had in mind. Having finished, one of his men asks what to do next. DeLong states that sins of lust are punishable by death by fire, pointing to the presence of a boiler in the apartment. He orders the man to be thrown into it. As they were throwing the man into the cauldron, one of the guys remarked, "That cauldron looks pretty old." He then asked if they thought it would explode with a body inside. Another guy next to him told him to cut the crap and go to the DeLong. Suddenly something completely unexpected happened. The cauldron exploded and the man who was still next to him was thrown backwards. Fortunately, he was caught by a friend. Meanwhile, Mo was working. He had finally finished making a framework for growing crops with the available supplies. Even if he didn't go outside, he could last for a long time. But it wasn't enough. Supplies would run out sooner or later. Sustainable self-sufficiency was key. His plan was to build the perfect survival room that would be self-sufficient. The freeze had been going on for almost an hour now, so he needed to speed up. He found the right moment to use his power and speed up. Suddenly there was a knock on the door, and he wondered who it was that was knocking at this time. He opened the door, feeling a familiar sensation. It turned out to be the very same guards. They apologized, and Mo, recognizing them, asked what was the matter. Fatty explained that they had just announced on the radio that the temperature outside had plummeted, and the heating had been broken. He was afraid people wouldn't notice it at night, so they came to remind everyone to be safe. Another similar incident happened in his past life. Back then, the heating failed and was not repaired in time. By the time he tried to fix it, it was beyond repair. They can't afford to make the same mistake again this time, so it has to be fixed. Mo asks the guards if they can take him to it. He must be able to fix it. They agree, and after leaving his room, Mo heads upstairs. But the guard asks where he is going. Mo replies that the boiler room is upstairs, but he is corrected that it is actually in the basement. Despite the landlord mentioning the illegal boiler room, Mo follows them downstairs. Upon arrival, they find that the place is unusually cold, and Mo notices a strange smoke like cold air. The fat man calls his name, pointing out the damage. Mo quickly repairs the damage, but then notices a blue liquid that triggers his memories. Suddenly, a monster appears behind Blondie, leaving him confused. Unfortunately, the monster destroys Blondie's head and devours his body. Mo, puzzled, wonders about the presence of the white-skinned creature. Meanwhile, Fatty, also puzzled, is confronted by the creature, which turns its gaze on him. Mo activates his powers and saves Fatty from the monster's imminent attack with super speed. Old Lao Chiao almost lost his head like Blondie. As the door remains open, Mo realizes that he can save himself by running at full speed. However, to his surprise, the monster keeps up with him. The creature looks like the Titan from AOT. It's getting closer, and Mo, finding himself in such a dangerous situation, fears he's going to be devoured. He wondered if the decrease in speed was due to the fact that he was carrying Fatty. After thinking about it, he glanced at the door and decided to throw Fatty outside, which he did. Fatty was shocked at the unexpected turn of events as he landed outside the door. Suddenly, Mo's reflexes kicked in, and he dodged the monster's smashing attack. Watching him, Mo noticed that the monster seemed to be related to Fatty, but it wasn't clear to him why. To figure it out, he needed to remember what had happened. In the beginning, when he had held on to Fatty, the monster had caught up with him. Now, without Fatty, his speed was faster than the monster's. Could there be some reason why his ability wasn't working? When the monster raised his hand to attack again, he quickly dodged it, internally thinking that this condition had nothing to do with the monster, but must be related to Fatty. When he threw Fatty, a strange phenomenon happened. Energy appeared when his ability was activated. Looking around, he wondered if there was a connection between the pebbles. Suddenly, it hit him. He knew that in his past life, people had faced these monsters with no chance of survival. Therefore, when he saw a monster, he only thought about how to save himself. But now everything had changed. If his hunch was correct, the former prey could also become the hunter. Holding the stone in his hands, he prepared himself, charged a huge attack, and with a powerful swing, he completely destroyed the monster. Just as he thought, his hunch proved to be correct. His ability could only affect targets infected with energy. He smirked, knowing that as long as they were contaminated with energy, he could accelerate them, thus increasing the kinetic energy of the objects. Even a small stone could have the power of an electromagnetic cannon at a certain acceleration. A blue gust fell onto the floor. It came from Mo's eye. He was confused, but he knew it was blue blood. What's going on here? He was perplexed. Suddenly, with no answer, he fell to his knees, blood gushing from his mouth, and then collapsed to the floor. He was so cold, but before he passed out, he noticed Fatty walking towards him. He was grateful to Fatty that he was okay. Fatty, also known as Lao Chiao, told him to keep his eyes open. However, after a while, he heard a different voice. When he opened his eyes, he found that he was in a different place and new faces were standing in front of him telling him that the wind outside was too strong to go to the hospital. Even if they wanted to, the main gate was frozen shut and couldn't withstand the blizzard. Lao Chao told the others to find something to block the wind and turn up the heat in the guard room. The girl suggested that Mo might have been poisoned and inquired about what had happened in the basement. Feeling very cold, Mo closed his eyes, but was advised to hang on and not fall asleep. Opening his eyes again, he found that he was in another room where Mrs. Fang told Lao Chao to leave and find Xiaozhou upstairs. As Mo closed and opened his eyes, a few moments later someone entered the room. Closing his eyes again, he heard a voice telling him to hang on because they were almost there. Opening his eyes again, he found himself in a different place where a new character told Lao Chao to leave. Mo was very cold, and Zhou realized that with Mo's body temperature so low, it was a miracle he was still alive, which made her wonder if he was some sort of cryogenic person. Record 409. Patient is male, age 20 to 25. Suspected poisoning. Currently in a coma, his vital signs remain abnormal. His body temperature is around 10 degrees, but his pulse and nerve reflexes have no abnormalities, which is truly amazing. The blood draw is complete and the results should now be analyzed. Something intriguing, never before seen, caught her attention. The blood before centrifugation was indistinguishable from normal blood. However, after centrifugation, blue impurities were released from the blood. Analyzing the blood sample would take some time, so she intended to continue observing the surface characteristics of the patient by studying the marks on his body. At first glance, they could be mistaken for veins, but a closer look reveals that they are an allergic reaction. Suddenly, Mo opened his eyes, puzzled as to what was happening to him. She advised him not to move around haphazardly just yet. Confused, he asked who she was. She lit a cigarette and introduced herself as a regular, unlicensed black market doctor, but for some reason she couldn't give her name. She had allowed him to call her doctor. She now wanted to understand how he had come to be in such a condition, and, admitting that she had never seen such symptoms before, she asked him to tell her what had happened in the cellar. She showed great interest in his case, emphasizing that she was extremely interested. Our hero is currently in Brooklyn, where the temperature is a chilling -29°C. The known world record for the lowest body temperature is 13.7 degrees Celsius. This is the lowest temperature ever recorded. Although theoretically the human body can tolerate 0 degrees Celsius, at this temperature the body tissues freeze and cells are destroyed. In fact, temperatures below 32 degrees Celsius can lead to atrioventricular tremor and eventually death, a condition known as hypothermia. A person cannot survive at -29 degrees Celsius, let alone a body temperature below 13.7 degrees Celsius. After checking his temperature, she told him to take a look at his current body temperature himself. It's a miracle he's still alive. He inwardly wonders how he managed to survive with a body temperature of 11.5 degrees Celsius. He ponders if it has something to do with his abilities, but he doesn't have time to ponder about it now because he has an important plan to fulfill as soon as possible. Suddenly he decides to stand up, but he slips and falls to the floor. Ju notices him and reminds him that she warned him not to move because his body is very weak right now. However, that's not the point. She guesses what he owns. She asks him if he has a superpower. Shocked, he asks himself how she could know. Feeling pressed for time, he takes her question as a joke. She warns him not to underestimate the doctor's powers of observation. Despite her warning, he waves her off and tries to use his powers but finds them ineffective. Instead of speeding up, he spits out blue blood again, causing her to ask if he's okay. He was perplexed as to what was happening to him. He couldn't use his accelerating power. He wondered why now. Suddenly, DeLong and his men appeared in front of Dr. Zhou's door. He knocked, attracting the attention of those sitting inside. She told him to hurry up and stand up. He asked what was the matter and who was at the door, but she just told him to lie down. He didn't understand what was going on, but she explained to him that if he wanted to survive, he had to do what she said. She told him to wait here, close his eyes, and not to move if he heard anything. She opened the door and Dalong walked in, apologizing for disturbing her. She asked what he wanted from her, and he asked if he could come in and chat for a bit, to which she agreed. She asked what he needed, to which he replied that he had heard that Resident 4009 was being treated by her and would like to ask him for something. Zhou then informed DeLong that, unfortunately, the man he was looking for had died of poisoning. Mo, who was lying next to him, recognized Luo Delong in the man's voice. He was puzzled and frustrated as to why this person was here in the first place. If he could use his acceleration ability right now, he would personally kill this guy right here and now. Suddenly, DeLong noticed something and asked Zhou if she was sure the man was really dead. DeLong replied that he thought he saw the man blink and said that he would help her check to see if the man was really dead. Zhou asked him what he meant, to which he held out his sharp weapon threateningly, saying that the man might be pretending to be dead. When DeLong was about to stab Mo, Zhou suddenly slapped him in the face and then asked him if he doubted her abilities. DeLong's subordinates got angry and started cursing Zhou, asking how she dared to hit DeLong if she didn't wish for his death. To their shock, DeLong told his subordinates to stop and then apologized to the doctor. He lit his lighter and her cigarette, saying that she had saved many of his men, so it was his own fault for doubting her. He acknowledged that his behavior was his fault and asked her not to be angry. However, he also reminded her not to forget who took care of her and her shabby and dirty clinic. He asked her to give him an answer to that question as soon as possible. Despite his request to think about it, she only sighed, calling his words nonsense. After he left, she told Mo to stand up, realizing that he must have many questions piling up. Indeed, in his past life, DeLong at least had a reason to kill him. But Mo wondered why this DeLong wanted to kill him the first time they met, and why this woman wanted to protect him. But before that, he asked where his clothes were, to which she replied that it was the first thing he cared about. The temperature in the basement plummeted to 40 degrees Celsius. The man recalls watching his father fiddling with the stove as a child and is determined not to become like him. But now he considers his father a hero for keeping them alive in such extreme cold. The other man assures him that the weather will eventually normalize and advises him not to dwell on negative thoughts about his father. DeLong joins the conversation and asks if they expect the weather to improve soon, noting the government's silence even online, suggesting that they may have given up. He suggests that the cold wave may be divine punishment. Suddenly, old Lao Chiao, bound by DeLong, jokes about divine justice, asking why DeLong is not being punished for his sins. DeLong defends his actions, saying that he is simply keeping the building in order by trading heat for supplies. Old Lao Chiao criticizes DeLong's version of order, accusing him of coercion. DeLong argues that it is a fair exchange. He provides the heating and they provide the supplies, which is an equivalent exchange. Lao Chiao disagrees with DeLong and calls him a monster, but DeLong only smirked and said that it was a pity that the tenant from House 409 seemed to have died already. Otherwise, there would have been another person who could have enjoyed the fruits of the order he had imposed. Knowing that DeLong was talking about Mo, Lao Chiao was shocked and saddened by Mo's death. Meanwhile at the apartment, Zhou asked Mo if he had time to get dressed. If so, she asked him to come here as soon as he was ready. He told her that he might have to wait a bit because even getting dressed was a hassle. When he was done, he asked what it was, and she asked how long he thought he had been unconscious. He replied 6 hours, but to his shock, she replied that it had been 6 days. She told him that a lot had happened in those 6 days. She explained that DeLong controls the entire heating system in the apartment and requires tenants to exchange consumables for the right to use it, otherwise he turns off their heat. She went on to explain that several residents have gone outside to find supplies. Going outside now is almost no different than committing suicide, and those who went out probably thought they were going to die anyway. Remembering the current Dalong and the Dalong from his past life, Mo flashed with anger because no matter what timeline he's in, he's a monster. Clenching his fist, Mo asked the doctor if there was a way to restore his body. Hearing his words, she was surprised and said that of course there is a way, but if he wants her to tell him, there is a condition. After all, she is running an underground clinic, not a charity. So she asked him if he could agree. He asked what her condition was, because if he could do it, it would be done. Finding his answer acceptable, she took him by the chin and said that she wanted him to be the subject of her research, and that only she could study him. She told him not to worry because her research would not endanger his life, as she had said before. He was very interesting to her. With a smile on his face, he agreed to the deal. She then told him that there was a special substance in his blood, but she hadn't quite figured out what it was yet. What is known for sure is that these substances absorb thermal radiation. They help him convert the thermal radiation into energy suitable for the human body. This phenomenon happens only when he lacks heat. However, before absorbing a certain amount, his body will be in such a cold state. Simply put, his body suddenly had a medium capable of storing energy. His current weak state was simply hunger. Hearing this, he asked if he just needed to eat a large amount of food and everything would be fine, to which she replied, "Absolutely right, but the amount of food would be very large, and she didn't have that much food right now." Smirking, he told her not to worry because he had a way. As he walked down the stairs to return to his room, he inwardly remarked that it was a good thing he had prepared ahead of time and gone to the supermarket to do some shopping. Since he was able to get home safely, It was already a victory. After the bad guys left, he sneaked to his apartment and used his fingerprint to open the door. Once inside his room, he was shocked, inwardly asking himself if the heat had been turned off. It really could freeze a person to death. He cursed himself aloud for turning the entire room into an ice house. Looking through the things he had bought, he found this: the food with the highest calorie content. He opened the box, and it turned out to be full of chocolate. After he saw it, bad memories came flooding back. After that, he ate it, but there was no reaction, so he thought that the amount was not enough. So he decided to increase the dose. After a hearty meal, something unusual happened. He was pierced by a sharp pain accompanied by an unquenchable thirst for warmth. A feeling of terror, as if death were imminent, made him collapse to his knees, panting and struggling to keep control of himself. Suddenly, 2 of his former adversaries approached his room and were surprised to find it unlocked. One of them assumed that DeLong had intended to cut Mo's fingers to enter the room. Their surprise was replaced by delight when they discovered the abundance of supplies inside. However, there was a strange change with Mo. The once blue veins were now pulsing threateningly red. Rising to his feet, he was confronted by uninvited guests who demanded to know who he was and whether he had opened the door. Meanwhile, Zhou prepared to study the final simulation report, wanting to know the truth about Mo's condition. The transition back to the active state proved problematic. It affected neural activity and caused a dangerous glycogen imbalance. Back in the room, the 2 men began to berate Mo, claiming it was his property. But he only answered them with a threatening look, and a purple aura enveloped him. At that moment, he lost control of his own body. 72 hours ago, Zhou had been in the basement wondering what had happened there to turn Mo into such a person. Suddenly she noticed something and, intrigued, picked it up and put it in her bag. As she continued to explore the basement, she noticed a monitor that was recording everything that was happening. Realizing that she needed to find out the truth, she decided to head to the security room. No sooner had she taken a step, however, than speakers crackled in the apartments and a voice addressed the residents. He told everyone to ration their supplies to avoid waste, as they would now have to pay a small compensation for heating. As this announcement echoed through the building, the 2 troublemakers ran into an elderly man, old Lao Chiao. Despite his weight, they remembered DeLong's warning to keep an eye on the boiler. Zooming in, you can see DeLong speaking into a microphone. The residents of the house are confused. They question whether this is a prank and speculate about old Lao Chiao's involvement. However, one of the residents notes that the voice does not sound like old Lao Chiao's. Undeterred, DeLong continues his speech, emphasizing the seriousness of the situation. He ominously runs his finger over the heating button and decides to temporarily turn it off to conserve resources. After his heinous act, he breaks out into maniacal laughter. Meanwhile, Mo appears. Someone dressed just like Mo asks if he hates him. We peek into Mo's mind, imagining him as a prisoner being interrogated by red energy, asking questions about his hatred for DeLong. At the mention of DeLong's name, Mo's eyes flash with vengeance, and he defiantly confirms his hatred for him. He grabbed the neck of one of the guys standing next to him, and suddenly the guy started burning as if his entire body was being burned from the inside out. Instead of the guy's face, however, Mo saw the face of DeLong, who asked him if he knew that human flesh tasted almost like beef. Those words made him even more angry, so he threw the guy out of the room, and he fell down next to the other people after punching through the wall. They looked at the skeletal figure lying before them, confused, scared, and shocked. It looked like the dead man had fallen from the 4th floor. Meanwhile, the dead man's friend was perplexed about what had just happened. Looking at Mo, he wondered what kind of person he was, and even wondered if Mo could be an alien given the red aura surrounding him. He inwardly cursed, realizing that it was impossible to defeat Mo, and decided to take action. He jumped into the air, ready to strike, but Mo remained unfazed and smirked. He looked at the guy, but all he could see was DeLong's face as he leapt towards him, reminding him of jungle legends. Mo quickly dodged the guy's attack, startling him with his speed. Mo started taunting him, and the guy attacked again, but Mo easily dodged. The guy attacked again, but Mo dodged again, still thinking he was fighting DeLong. This time Mo decided not to dodge. He raised his arm with a fierce look and rushed towards the guy, chopping him in half with his arm and speed. The moment the man's dismembered body was lying on the floor, someone walked up to him and called Mo's name. Mo turned around to see who it was and saw his ex-girlfriend Xiaoming pointing a gun at him. She shot him, but since Mo could only see the people he hated in that uniform, he didn't realize that the girl wasn't Xiaoming, but Zhou. Zhou reassured him not to worry because it was only insulin. Mo started to lose consciousness and fell into her arms. Chu explained that the substance she had injected him with was supposed to dissipate the excess heat in his body. However, something unusual happened. The cold room filled with green, and she was confused, wondering what was happening. Hunger. Hunger has always been a catalyst for human atrocities. Hunger never comes alone, but with it always comes its relatives, no less horrible and merciless than itself. Cannibalism in families. And of course wars. All these things have happened many times in human history and spared no one. But everything changed thanks to the development of agricultural technology and improved methods of food production. Thanks to its sufficient quantity, human society managed to gradually stabilize and develop to unprecedented heights. However, hunger never completely disappeared forever and only waited for the right moment to return with renewed vigor in this frozen world. Now that farming has become an almost impossible task, hunger has once again become a catalyst for human atrocities. And the dark history of humanity is about to repeat itself. However, there's always an exception. Meanwhile, Mo was sleeping peacefully on a lush green plant in the middle of the room. Xiaoju herself had knocked him out with her injection recently, and now only apologized to him for having to sleep again after he had only recently woken up. But it wasn't our hero she was interested in right now, but the plants that had grown very quickly in the room. She wondered what it was all about. There were ripe tomatoes on these plants, and she couldn't resist picking one. And taste it, in the week since the ice apocalypse, fresh vegetables were already a rare treasure. The tomatoes grew very quickly and were already filling half the room. Surprisingly, the tomatoes themselves tasted quite good. Besides, this amount was enough to feed the whole apartment building. Meanwhile, outside, things were not so rosy. The frost and snowstorms did not stop, and it was getting worse by the day. In the midst of such unfavorable weather, a couple of people were hurriedly walking forward. However, the girl suddenly stopped with a stomachache. She had been starving for too long and was now barely hanging on. The guy who was with her also stopped and asked how she was and if she could hold on a little longer. She smiled at her lover and assured him that it wouldn't be a problem and she would try to hold on through. The guy couldn't stand her suffering and suggested that she wait a little while he would look for a bar of chocolate that he might have in his pockets. She tried to assure him that he shouldn't, but he wouldn't listen to her. He was immersed in the search for his treasure that the bastard had almost taken from him. Unfortunately, he couldn't find that candy bar. And there was a simple reason. His wife told him to stop looking and remember that they had given that candy bar to their dear daughter this morning before going out to look for food. They were talking quietly, and because of the snowstorm they were completely oblivious to the dark silhouette approaching them. The boy laughed carelessly when he admitted that he had just completely forgot about it. And that laugh was the last one he would ever have. He felt useless, and the clawed paw was ready to end his suffering. One swing, and what had been his head turned into bloody scraps. Right in front of his wife, the giant ice monster immediately grabbed the decapitated body before it could even fall to the ground. The monster's mouth was in a very unconventional place, but that didn't bother it at all, and it began to devour its victim greedily. The woman just stood and watched in shock and couldn't move. The monster had quickly consumed her husband and now greedily began to look at the woman, who looked quite delicious to him. Even in the face of the threat looming over her, she couldn't move and only asked herself, "What is this?" She probably would have died there if not for the voice of one of the survivors from the nearest house, who urged her to stay focused and run away. She still didn't know what was going on, and just looked around nervously. The guy was waving with all his might to get her attention and show her the way to safety. She had to hurry and run as fast as she could if she wanted to live. As soon as she started to move and run, the monster didn't slow down either and rushed after her in pursuit. It was clearly faster and soon caught up with her and reached out its paw to finish her off as well. She was already staring in horror at the face of her death, when suddenly the monster stumbled and missed, throwing up only snow. But that was enough to send the woman flying, and bounced like a ball across the snow, which fortunately cushioned her fall. But she had no more chances. She had no time to get up, and the monster was already looming over her with its wide-open maw. For the umpteenth time in the last few minutes, she looked into the eyes of death, but even this time she was ready to be saved by this mysterious stranger who was preparing a fiery cocktail for the monster. He acted quickly, and it saved the woman's life. Such a fiery greeting was very disliked by the monster. The explosion was so strong that the flames almost hit the frightened woman. But it gave her time to recover, and the opportunity to continue running to her rescue. The ice monster certainly did not like such a fiery greeting, for it hated anything hot. Soon the woman reached the entrance of the building, and looking back she noticed that the thing didn't seem to be following her anymore. There was an elevator waiting for her inside, which was very convenient for her. She was finally saved. At least that's what she thought. As she approached the elevator, behind her back, she heard the scraping of metal with which the monster was pushing its way inside the building. Apparently those flames weren't enough to stop it, and now the monster was only more angry and hungry. In desperation, the woman began to press the elevator button and plead with him to hurry. The monster was relentlessly closing in on her with each passing second, and the damn elevator was still in no hurry to come down. Suddenly the same guy yelled at her to close her eyes. She still didn't understand why, but she obeyed, because he had already helped her more than once. Immediately, many bright spotlights blinded the monster. He didn't like it. He hated bright lights almost as much as he hated heat. Apparently, this guy was a bit of a scene and rock fan, and a Kurt Cobain fan. He carried his guitar around for a reason, and soon the speakers were pointed full blast at the monster, who, as it turns out, didn't like rock. This guy must have known a lot about these creatures to attack their vulnerabilities so skillfully. Let's take a closer look at this woman. Her name is Dorothy. Dorothy Perez, to be more precise. Her childhood dream was to become a doctor, and she never gave up on it. Of course, as she grew up, her enthusiasm for the idea waned, and her childhood dream was shattered by the hardships of life. But she still kept going, and became a nurse. Although she worked in a hospital, it was not the job she had always dreamed of. It was dirty, stinky, and ungrateful. Luckily, everything changed for her when she met Matt. He was a patient from a car accident, and that's how they met. There was a ray of sunshine in her sad life, and it was like a fairy tale. One look, and they fell in love. Things moved very quickly from there. Right after Matt got well, they got married, and just a year later, they had a daughter, Maggie. She and her husband worked hard, and after a few years moved into a new apartment. And just when it seemed that life had settled down and their daughter was growing up healthy and happy, everything went wrong again. We all know it all too well, whether it's the sudden frozen world or thugs taking over the apartment or monsters. Dorothy had been through so much already that she thought nothing would surprise her. But what was happening now, and this just man with a guitar, who managed to suppress the monster with his rock music, was able to surprise her and give her hope again. Even though this is the most ridiculous thing ever, soon the last chords of the flow of strong music ended as the song came to an end. And the monster that was just waiting for the opportunity swung into action, about to destroy this annoying man and the source of this disgusting sound. But the guy bravely faced death with a smile on his face. In fact, he was only waiting for the monster to come closer to activate the trap he had prepared. Immediately, a whole bunch of metal rods flew at the monster. It almost managed to reach the guy with its limb, but the rods were faster. They buried it securely and immobilized it. Even an ice monster couldn't withstand the combination of steel and gravity. There were so many rods that they completely buried it, and only convulsively twitching limbs reminded of its existence. Dorothy still couldn't believe it was over, that all this madness was finally over. But still, she couldn't bear it any longer. The shock had begun to wear off, and the pain of loss had taken its toll on her. She could no longer hold back the tears. Luckily, she wasn't alone, and the stranger who had saved her came up to her and held out his hand. He smiled sincerely and assured her that everything is fine now. The frosty wind and blizzard continued to howl outside the window, and Dorothy tried to keep warm, immersing herself in memories of such lost and cherished happiness looking at the photo. On it was her once happy family, which was no longer there. The guy walked up to her and wished her husband to rest in peace. Who would have thought that the survivors would find refuge in an abandoned construction site graffitied with images of Ernesto Che Guevara? The guy was sure that dust to dust, ashes to ashes, and besides mourning the dead, they also need to protect the living. Dorothy was a bit in no mood for philosophizing and found it difficult to understand what he had just said. He had to apologize for saying something strange. The awkward silence dragged on. The guy started to say something, but Dorothy interrupted him and introduced herself first. The guy hesitated and somehow uncertainly also introduced himself as Corbin, and don't even think it was a name he had just made up. It didn't matter to Dorothy. She was just grateful to her savior. But the conversation still didn't go beyond a formal please. Then Dorothy asked how Corbin had come to be here. Had he also left the house in search of supplies? As it turned out, his situation was a little more complicated. It was easier for him to show than to tell, and there was a small chance that she could help him. There were pictures in his guitar case, and one of them was of a friend of his. He'd come all the way from Seattle looking for him, but once he got here, he'd been trapped by this cold wave. Even with all these difficulties, he didn't give up hope of finding his friend and showed his photo to Dorothy. Once upon a time, they had played band together in high school. Surprisingly, Dorothy recognized in this guy in the photo, Mo, who lived in apartment 409. As soon as she said that, the whole place shook. It turned out that the troubles were not over for the day, and now even Corbin didn't understand what was going on. The whole town was shaking from the stomping that was going on down the road and raising clouds of snow. Corbin looked closely at what was moving there and couldn't understand. What were those? They were ice monsters, but not like the one he had defeated before. There was a whole pack of them, and behind them was the biggest monster who was leading the pack. Their movements didn't look chaotic at all. It was clear that they were moving towards a specific goal. Dorothy noticed it too and was horrified when she realized where they were going, straight toward the apartment, where her young daughter was staying. Meanwhile, inside the apartment, our hero was just coming to his senses. He opened his eyes, and the first thing he saw was someone's breasts. But that's not what interested him now. He was wondering, when did he pass out again? But as soon as he realized that it was a woman, he was quite surprised and tried to understand what was going on. It turned out that Xiaozhou was just finishing connecting the sensors to him, and that was why she was so close to him. She was not the least bit embarrassed by the fact that he was awake. It was even more convenient for her since she had finished putting it on him. The only question that flashed through his mind was what had she put it on him? But that question immediately fell away when he looked at his body and tried to move. He was chained to a chair and he was not happy with this. Her experiments had gone too far. Xiaozhou tried to calm him down and assured him that it was just a safety measure for him. It sounded dubious to Mo, and what the collar had to do with safety was a mystery to him. Let's dive deeper into the history of collars, no matter how cheesy it sounds. Collars have always been one of the oldest pieces of ornament in the world, and its meaning has always been changing. In the past, it was a symbol of slavery and represented control and possession over an object. But now it can also be a toy for adults. Fortunately or not, that's not our case. And Dr. Xiaozhou assured Mo that he didn't have to worry, as what was around his neck was definitely not for such a purpose. Mo himself hadn't even thought about anything dirty until she mentioned it. Now it seemed to him that things hadn't gone as they had agreed. The terms he had agreed to were not the same. He had agreed to be the object of study, not her personal toy. Still, Joe had assured him that he was the research subject and that the collar was just a special monitoring tool. She was going to experiment with the thing inside his body that she had mentioned earlier. At the time, she'd said it would help him absorb heat and store it. But after taking a closer look and analyzing all the facts, Joe found out that it has more than one function, and this collar she designed specifically to prove her hypothesis. When Mo's blood sugar level is too high, it activates another state of this thing inside him. This collar will change its color from blue to red when Mo's blood sugar level gets too high. Of course, Mo didn't understand all these explanations, so he asked her what she was talking about and what this other state even meant. Joe simply asked him if he remembered what happened 20 minutes ago. This was a question our hero could not answer. All his memories were like broken pieces that he couldn't put together into a complete memory, and in the end, he couldn't remember anything normal. But before he started to feel concerned about it, Joe assured him that he shouldn't worry. It's okay that he can't remember. She's just here to find out what's going on. After all, it's also part of their research. For some reason, Mo kept getting the feeling that this woman has a hold on him. But that wasn't the point. He wanted to find out what was going on with him too. And once he found out, he would definitely have an advantage over this strange woman. However, Joe had her own plans for him and she pressed the button. As soon as she did so, Mo's body shook and he screamed in sudden pain. He didn't realize what was going on and why his left arm had all started to turn red. Everything came to a head when he looked at the substance that was injected into his blood, 25% glucose injection, too much concentration for an ordinary person. Even Joe was surprised to see such a big reaction from his body and decided to record the data first. Mo could barely hold on and asked this crazy doctor what she had done to him. Joe seemed amused by his screams, and she just remembered one thing she had almost forgotten about. All for the experiment, of course. Mo tensed up and asked in a panic what she was going to do. And it wasn't what you might think. She just put the pot with the plant in front of him. However, this didn't clear up the situation for Mo in the slightest. He had completely lost all hope of understanding what was going on. As soon as he realized it was a plant, his eyes widened and filled with that red energy, and his body just released a whole wave of energy that filled the entire room. Now it wasn't Mo anymore, and he was shouting, "Joe, how dare she trick him?" Meanwhile, someone suspiciously similar to himself was watching all of this with a sly smile. He was moving at a speed that Flash would have envied. It felt like time had stopped. When he passed plants, they instantly began to grow, blossom, and bear fruit. He stood right in front of the real Mo, who could only now see this stranger. Our hero couldn't believe his eyes and asked what was going on. Well, the stranger was just about to explain everything to him. They just had to meet again just for that. Mo noticed their striking resemblance and asked the stranger if he was our hero himself. It didn't seem real anymore, and Mo decided to tell the doctor that he was hallucinating. But the second entity assured him that he was stupid, and she couldn't hear him now. The lack of reaction from her side only proved his words. She really couldn't hear them. Time stopped for Joe, as it did for the rest of the world, except for our hero. Mo then asked him if he had done it. He evasively replied that something yes, but also no. This answer did not satisfy Mo, and he was beginning to lose patience. What does this stranger mean? And who is he really? And why does he look just like our hero? Then he answered that, to be more precise, they did it all together. After all, he alone couldn't achieve this level of power. As for who he was, he had an idea to remind our hero who he was, so he threw off his hood. Mo was shocked. Now he remembered everything. 2 pairs of blue eyes, he'd seen it before. Mo remembered that he had seen a similar creature when he fell through the ice and narrowly escaped death from the monster. Yes, that was when it happened. All of Mo's powers and the fact that he was able to resurrect and go back in time, all of this was only possible because of this blue parasite that was now living in his body. The parasite could take many forms, but the main thing was that it wanted to coexist peacefully because it would be beneficial to both of them. We all love fictional stories about secret government organizations that save the world from imminent doom, such as the Shield and others. Well, in this world, such an organization failed in its mission, at least at first. It's called the National Security and Logistics Bureau. It's a branch of the National Security Agency. Abbreviated as NSAL, it's one of the few departments in the country that can operate independently even after other government agencies collapsed. The NSAL has its own medical unit, administrative units, and even military units. The NSAL can be said to be the last guarantee of civilization in the world after the government has collapsed. And in one of the organization's bunkers, someone was calling loudly for Xiao Luo, the sister of the familiar Xiao Zhou. Things were going badly for NSAL, and the network still hasn't been restored. This question had been raised too many times in the last 2 days, and the agent who had to answer it all the time irritatedly replied that there was no change on this issue. All because the information department says it's a hardware issue, and to fix this issue, they need to contact the engineering department, and there is still no way to do that. All because of the situation outside, a lot of their data and information used pretty primitive old technology, and now it's hard to do anything about it. Xiao Luo worked for the agency under the working name Barbara Ripley in the biochemistry department. She was a leader and an agent with level 4 clearance. And when she heard the reason why the network was still not working, it became clear to her that those slackers were just shifting the responsibility one to the other. Her assistant had almost finished the report, but she still wanted to add some details. Barbara quickly glanced at her work and noted that her report was already good enough and she should send it to her first. The assistant didn't want to send the unfinished work. Her perfectionism just wouldn't let her do it. Barbara laughed at that and asked if she was really that dumb. Their bald-headed supervisor wouldn't read this report seriously anyway. He's just too dumb. That's what happened. After barely looking at the report and not understanding anything, he quickly slammed it down and stated that the situation is an emergency right now. An NSAL doesn't have time to discuss such things now. Barbara had heard him say that more than once and only rolled her eyes tiredly. Here we go again. As expected, Frank Kordick, who was the head of the Strategic Solutions Department, went into a tizzy. He was angry that first climate change, then cyber attacks had made their communication methods completely unusable. What's more, their field agents have also been out of contact for over 48 hours. Nor is it possible to contact those sleeper agents who still haven't been activated. Frank was sure they were in a real war and needed to act. As a true Fallout fan, he believed that war never changes. But Barbara thought otherwise, and she made it clear to him with a sneaky low blow. The poor man got hit on his weak spot and paid the price for pestering Barbara with his political correctness and other trash. Instead, she took him to the lab to show the really important sample they had managed to get their hands on. Now Barbara asked him what he thinks now, and did he understand why she was so anxious? Frank was so amazed by what he saw that he even forgot about his battered dignity. In the cell was a monster that had been caught not far from the bunker. The monster did not show any activity yet, and only quietly whispered incomprehensibly that he was a shell. They are all shells. Assistant Green explained to him that according to their observations, this creature had mutated from a human. It was hard to believe, but the undeniable proof of it was merely around the monster's neck. Frank took a closer look and read the name that was written on the army badge, Johnny Silver Hanmer. This guy was from the Department of Field Operations. No one knew exactly what happened, but it probably happened before the network went down. The missing agent's signal was picked up just before the network crashed, not far from the bunker. But when the security department found him, he was no longer showing any signs of life. Based on the information that was obtained, this guy was an activated agent, codenamed Silver Hammer. However, 24 hours later, the body that was placed in the morgue underwent a mutation, turning into this creature. Information has also been received from the CIA confirming that similar creatures have been seen even before the cold wave and other abnormal events have been associated with them. For example, this footage from one of the supermarkets. These two monsters were the first to be seen, and they too were all talking crap related to the shell. And another character, Psychic, who they temporarily decided to call Number Zero, and that was our hero, who now couldn't understand what was happening for the 100th time that day. 1 second ago, there was some weird blue bug in front of him, and now it's turned right in front of him into a beautiful girl, who was smiling dangerously at him, and not just smiling. The parasite was amused by the way people reacted to the opposite sex in certain states. Mo wondered again if it was all an illusion. He looked around and noticed that the surroundings looked as if time frozen. And even though he only thought about it, the parasite replied that he could think of it that way. Now Mo was shocked that the parasite could hear what he was thinking. Though if he thought about it that way, it wasn't surprising, since their bodies were connected now. Still, Mo didn't think so, and such an explanation seemed strange to him. Then the parasite explained to him that he could see it now because the woman had injected enough sugar into his blood to activate its consciousness. And Mo himself must have noticed by now that what he sees in front of him is just an illusion in his mind. Now, our hero remembered that the doctor had said that the substance inside him was a parasite, and so when she spoke of another state, she meant the activation of that substance. The parasite only added that strictly speaking, the substance that the doctor revealed is the blood of the parasite, and it's the part that gives Mo his abilities. Now the only question that still interested our hero was why this creature was parasitizing his body. Mo turned out to be a more curious host than the parasite expected, but still, he explained that creatures like him are different from humans, and they are not part of this dimension. Still, such an explanation did not help our hero. Intelligence had never been his strong side. The parasite went on to explain that people like him needed to parasitize the bodies of the natives of various dimensions in order to gain the ability to understand this dimension. To Mo, it all sounded like just another cheesy novel setting. However, the parasite was ready to convince him otherwise. Their race doesn't have what humans call names because they can't define themselves. The human concept of time seems meaningless to them because for them time is non-linear. From birth, such beings have been drifting through different dimensions. This is both their ability and their shackles because they cannot interfere with all material things of other dimensions themselves. They can only be parasites on the bodies of sentient beings from other dimensions in order to use their bodies to break the shackles of dimensions. The parasite was sure that it would be difficult for humans to understand all this. Beings like him want to hear and find their names, want to see the castles built over time. After all, if they can't even interfere with the world, how can they prove their own existence to themselves? Mo listened attentively to this existential philosophy and noticed that from what it was saying, it seemed quite lonely. Such a phrase surprised the parasite at first. Then it amused it. It was curious to him how a pitiful human being could feel sorry for a superior being. Is this what people call empathy? Now the parasite was sure that choosing humans as shells seemed to be the right choice. It also really liked the sweet expression on Mo's face now, but it had bad news for him. From the moment they joined together, our hero had become a target for the empty shells that would surely be here soon. And so it was. The pack of monsters that Dorothy had seen had tracked down our hero and were now near the building Mo was in. Their leader could sense his presence and his smell. There was food for them inside that building, along with their arch-enemy, who they were eager to destroy. The pack of shells acted like a pack of wolves, but vertical surfaces were no barrier at all. They were about to break into the apartments. Mo had no idea what his parasite meant by a shell, but he would have to find out soon. Soon enough. It was time to say goodbye, and the parasite assured him that if he needed him, he knew where to find him. He clapped his hands, and time slowly began to melt back. The parasite disappeared, and time went back to its normal speed, and the test tube that had been in the air for ages finally shattered. It wasn't the only thing that fell to the ground, though. Chaos reigned throughout the building. Screaming, running, and crying could be heard from everywhere. People were desperately trying to save their lives from the bloodthirsty shells. But the monsters were everywhere, and there seemed to be no chance of survival for anyone. Resistance as well as escape seemed impossible. However, One guy seemed to be able to escape from the carnage, though he was pursued by two of the creatures. To his disappointment, the door treacherously closed on its own at such an inopportune moment as this. There was no hope for him anymore. These were the last seconds of his life, and he knew it. However, for the monsters, the closing of the door was no obstacle, and they broke through it along with the body of that unlucky bandit from the Luo Delong gang. The shells did not stop for a moment, and before the other bandits even realized what was happening and what kind of creatures it was, they were already dead. This was a ghostly chance for Lao Chiao, although he too did not understand what these things were. They were suspiciously similar to the monster that Mo had saved him from, but at the same time, they were different and were currently doing something suspicious. They were sucking the blood out of their prey. Fortunately, it seemed that they had not noticed Lao Chiao yet. While they were busy with those poor souls, he needed to find an escape path. There was only one problem. He was tied tightly. It would be very difficult to break the rope without tools, and as bad luck would have it, the pillar didn't have any sharp corners. However, Lao Chiao was not as simple as he might seem at first glance, and he had a couple of old tricks from his younger days. In one confident move, he dislocated his thumb and freed his hand. It wasn't hard to do thanks to old injuries from his youth, so it was very convenient now. Before he was spotted, he needed to find another way past these monsters. In this situation, he couldn't afford to leave empty-handed. He needed to get to the security room. There were still weapons in the vault, thanks to those stupid thieves who didn't even realize it was a weapons locker. While he was coming up with his plan, he almost fell victim to another shell that came up from the side and was preparing to attack. It looked like his luck was running out for the day after all, and this was the end of it. Meanwhile, the top floor was still relatively calm, and Joe was summarizing the results of the experiment. Just as she thought, the plants had responded to his influence and were able to grow quickly in a short time. Mo wasn't interested in such details at all. He just wanted to know how soon she would remove the damn shackles and collar from him. However, Joe was in no hurry to let him go. She was summarizing the results of her research. It turned out to be true that he couldn't use his abilities for a long period of time. Otherwise, he would fall into the weakened state he already knew. Eventually, she gathered all the information she needed in the first place. Mo strained to free himself, and he reminded her loudly that she should hurry up and free him. But barely as she approached him, the entire building shook, and a strange sound caught their attention. It was coming from right outside the doors. Joe didn't understand what was going on, but Mo was beginning to guess what it might be. The creatures the parasite was talking about were already here, and the first of them had entered the room through the ventilation. From his past life, Mo knew them as white skins, but the parasite corrected him and whispered in his ear that it was a shells. Mo was surprised that this annoying hallucination was still here, but the parasite quickly shut his mouth. Now was not a good time at all to dwell on unnecessary trifles. After all, if he didn't do anything, that woman would soon be killed. Mo entered his speed mode, wondering why all the women around him were so complicated. He carefully and gently picked Joe up in his arms, as gently as he could, and quickly took her out of the shell's line of attack. The monster missed, and Mo gently slowed down, and immediately asked Joe if she was all right. Surprisingly, even a stern-looking doctor like her appeared to be able to show an embarrassed expression on her face. Pretty quickly, the embarrassment was replaced by a playful smile. She even enjoyed experiencing firsthand his ability so close. Now they finally turned their attention to the monster. This was the first time Joe had seen something like this and didn't know what it was. Mo was a little more familiar with them and called them all different names, but one thing was the most important. They were definitely dangerous. But as long as Mo was around, Dr. Joe could not worry, since he was full of confidence in his ability to deal with this thing. Unfortunately, such an epic hero moment was spoiled by Joe when she decided to once again remind him that he shouldn't use his abilities too much. But despite this, Mo decided to thank her. Even though her approach might be a bit awkward, but judging from the results, Joe had actually helped him a lot, and for that he was grateful. She was shocked by such words at first, but then she just laughed and reminded him that now was not the time to talk about it. Well, in that case, Mo was ready to talk about it after he'd finished with those small fries, and then he'd be sure to thank her properly. However, the monsters didn't waste any time, and where they lacked strength, they were accustomed to using quantity. Soon, the room's ventilation was like holy cheese. The shells immediately jammed their surprised victims into a corner. But it was not their numbers that surprised Mo, but the fact that they acted collectively and in a coordinated manner. Dealing with one monster seemed like a manageable task, but with so many at once, it could surely cause him to fall into the weakened state again. Now his tenseness was even noticed by Jo, and she asked him what was wrong. She was looking forward to how he'd thank her, but with that she would have to wait a little longer than he had first expected. The monsters were already all on the attack. They weren't going to wait at all. Now Mo must take care of them all head-on. Luckily, he had something to please them. The monitoring collar was still on him, and Jo could now watch his stats. She wanted to find out where his limit lay, and to do so, she started monitoring the glycogen in Mo's body. Learned from past experience, our hero was in no hurry to attack. He knew too well that if he used acceleration for too long, he would quickly find himself in a weakened state before he dealt with all the monsters. But there was a solution. Mo just needed to use acceleration only when necessary, and the effect would be just as good, with less energy used. The Whiteskins weren't about to give up. They used pincer attack to take Mo by surprise. They weren't as dumb as they looked at first glance. But that didn't matter since our hero was no longer their prey. With the acceleration, Mo could calmly look around in the midst of the battle. Because when he activated acceleration, time slowed down relative to him and allowed him to observe the movements of enemies to predict their attacks. In this way, Mo could easily dodge their attacks without even using acceleration. It was also possible to do the same thing on offense. Even barehanded, as long as he accelerated his fists to a certain degree, Mo could unleash a supersonic sonic boom to tear his opponents to shreds, leaving them no chance. The remaining monsters weren't so confident anymore, and Mo couldn't resist taunting them. He was just getting started, and they had already wet their pants, if they had any, of course. Jo continued to monitor the consumption of calories. Although the rate of their consumption during the moments of skill usage had not decreased, the overall efficiency of usage had been optimized significantly. At the moment, it had consumed less than 10%. Jo couldn't help but notice how interesting the test subject was, so she decided to support her test subject, and told him that with such movements, he could easily crush his enemies. Her support, however, only had a negative effect, as she proved that she was still monitoring Mo's body, which he didn't like very much. The shells finally decided to make another attempt, and this time attacked all together at the same time. But even this coordinated attack didn't help them. Mo destroyed them with a single blast wave. This technique was quite exhausting. His veins turned blue and he needed to catch his breath. But other than that, it was fine, and he had only expended 17% of his energy for the fight. Jo had to admit that our hero had improved his abilities quite a bit in a short time. But now, she had a new question. Judging from the way he handled these things and knew what they were called, it meant that he knew a lot about these things, and Jo couldn't wait to hear everything he knew. Meanwhile, in the heating room, it seemed that one of the shells had gotten to its victim after all, and Lao Chiao had finally shared the fate of the rest of the residents of this building. But that wasn't really the case. He was alive, and relatively unharmed. Yes, he was unconscious from the impact and didn't realize what had happened, but the blood around him was clearly not his. It belonged to the monster he had accidentally killed with the crowbar he had held in front of him until the last. Now, he was beginning to remember what had just happened. White skin had rushed at him, and when it seemed that there was no hope, and he was cornered. Lao Chiao noticed a crowbar lying nearby. It saved his life. Otherwise, he would have been dead long ago. Now he had to hurry. If these monsters appeared again, he wouldn't be so lucky next time. Suddenly, the phone in his pocket rang. It was quite unexpected because the communication network had been unavailable for some time. It was an unknown number. Lao Chiao picked up the phone, and an unfamiliar voice greeted him and called his old long-forgotten name, Josh Castillo, and then corrected himself and asked if he should call him Mr. Curved Blade. Lao Chiao froze in horror, as if he had heard the voice of a ghost. His past would not let him go.
What will gonna happen next to find out? Just do like, share, and comment if you want the next part as soon as possible. And also help us by giving supers because your one support motivates us a lot to make such type of content. Thanks for watching. Sayonara.